Without a doubt, this is the coldest day of the year. Snowshoeing back here this morning, I've got snows up to my elbows and the temperature's down to the soles of my feet. And speaking of soles, I'm going to be talking about how to build moccasins today. One of the reasons I'm doing it, I should point out, and to give a sort of a shout out to Chris Johnson, today I'm bartering. So Chris built me that camp hatchet, and it's an absolute gem. In return, I'm bartering him, me building him a pair of winter moccasins. So that was the impetus I needed, but I needed a new pair myself. So it's all going to work out, but I can't do a segment without doing a wee bit of history. So I'm going to give a little bit of history behind primarily the Woodland moccasins, how they were made, the materials they used, and then I'm going to do, I hope, a tutorial to the point that you can actually undertake this yourself. It doesn't take a lot of skill, it just takes a lot of determination. So we'll start with different types of moccasins. So we've got the shoe pack, which essentially it's a hybrid of a European shoe. So it's got a hard sole, hard leather sole. This one's got two, and it's got a center seam. Now, I have been known to sew a layer of birch bark between those two layers of sole, which helps with waterproofing somewhat. And then I'm wearing a pair of what would be traditional brogans. You can see how crudely they're made, simply folded over and stapled at the front toe. Few people could afford these, certainly on the frontier, whether it was in Canada or the colonies. And they weren't that efficient. They didn't keep your feet warm. They were noisy for hunting. So the Europeans, particularly on the frontier, very quickly adapted native footwear. And as I said, today I'm going to be building a pair of winter moccasins. So, and these are getting tired, and they should. They're probably 15 plus years old. They're made of moose hide. So we've got pucker toe vamp construction. And inside, I've got a ninter moccasin, which is basically a center seam moccasin that I've made out of wool. So I've got 2 layers of wool on the side, you can see here, and I've got 3 layers sewn on the bottom. The reason I don't like a center seam, before I go further, here's a center seam pair of summer moccasins. So it's sort of a combination of pucker toe and center seam. And this is actually moose hide, brain tan moose hide. And you can see how thick and supple that is. For material for my moccasin making, I pretty much strictly stick to moose hide. I am going to show you a pair here in a few minutes that I made from buffalo, which are very difficult to sew. And then another option would be brain tan deer hide, which we recently finished 5 hides. Beautiful, soft, beautiful color, but a poor material for moccasins. If they're decorative, fine, but if you're going to wear them a lot, not so good. They just won't last like moose hide will. Yeah. So some might say I either got a lot of moccasins or a lot of time on my hand, but it is a fun project to do on winter evenings, you know, or during inclement weather, those snowstorms we've been having. So there's a pair of center seam moccasins. They're my summer moccasins. I made them out of buffalo hide, very, very thick, quite heavy or quite hard to sew, but they have worn very well. I've been on treks with them. I wear them at a lot of events, and they've performed very well. Here's another pair that I've had for years. Now this is brain tan deer hide. Pucker toe again with a vamp, and often they would do their decorative quill work on the vamp. This one's getting pretty tired, but the reason they would do that, or even on the side flaps, their beadwork or quill work, is when the moccasin itself wore out and needed to be replaced, you could reuse the vamp, you could reuse the side pieces on a new pair of moccasins and utilize that fine artwork. And then finally, a pair that, so all of those are woodland. We can date them back to woodland natives in and around the Great Lakes. So this would be a pair I made for Kathy that would be more Plains Indian style. So a side seam, it looked more like a slipper. So if you think of Sioux or Blackfoot, Nez Perce, anyway, that part of the world, they had a different type of moccasin. But again, a vamp, but basically a side seam instead of any kind of a pucker or a center seam. Get some of these guys out of the way and get on with attempting to do a tutorial on center seam, or not center seam, vamp, pucker toe, winter moccasin construction. And like I say, not a lot of skill, just you're going to need a little bit of determination if it's your first. So back to material for a minute. I was successful in the moose hunt last fall. However, that moose hide has not been tanned yet. So for material today, I'm using moose hide, but I've dyed it, and I'm going to use it in lieu of brain tanned. Not quite as strong, but so I finished the right moccasin, and now I'm going to be working on the left. And so I'm going to show you how I got to here, and then the last step here would be putting the uppers on that are going to cross over, and you'll see how they're going to be snow proof when they're done. Another thing I'm using, if you're trying to do everything historically accurate, which I encourage anyone to do, you would use things like waxed Irish linen. The option, and most people sadly decide to use artificial sinew. And it's dyed, and when you initially do it, it doesn't look too bad. But basically it's monofilament fishing line. And once ultraviolet gets on it, a little bit of wear, it looks like monofilament fishing line. So this would be an authentic item. It's strong. This will outlast the leather in a lot of cases. So I encourage you to get waxed Irish linen. As far as brain tan, very expensive, especially moose brain tan. So there's nothing wrong with starting with commercial tanned leather. Dye it. Once you've greased these all up, they're going to end up looking like this old pair that I've used for years. You're not going to be able to tell the difference between brain tanned and commercial. And finally, as I demonstrated earlier, my inner moccasin, there's an option to speed the process up and go modern. You can go to your local hardware store or wherever and buy these felt liners, which Chris has done. So they fit his feet. They're a size 10. So that's what I'm using as a model to build the moccasin. And now on to how I actually do it. Okay. I am definitely not using 18th century tools here or paper, but it's the only way I could figure out the best way, I should say, to do a tutorial so that you can actually do it yourself at home. If you've done enough, you can simply put your foot on a piece of hide using fingers as measurements, and I'm going to show you how to do that, and just draw a rough line. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this is going to show you the theory or the process behind it. So imagine you've got a bigger piece of paper. Your goal is to end up with that. In other words, that's your finished pattern. So let's say you've got a large piece of paper, which at the moment I don't. I've used them all up. But you're going to take your foot on that piece of paper, and I'll just pull this guy out, and standing inside your liner. So, and if you wear 3 or 4 pair of socks, then put 3 or 4 pair of socks on. Basically, you want whatever the size of that inner arrangement is going to be, you want when you make this line. Then you're going to step down on that large piece of paper with your foot inside, and using the Sharpie, you're going to ensure that you don't go back in on an angle like that, and don't be out like that. You want to be pretty much vertical and draw a line completely around that foot. And when you're done, you're going to have that shape on a large piece of paper. Now you haven't got this shape yet. So what I use here, I'm going to try to show you, you don't even need a ruler here. What I want here is to find half. So forget the tab at the end. What I'm going to do is fold that in half so that that part comes to the heel. That's the first half. Then I'm going to take the front half and I'm going to fold it in half so that the toe comes to where I found the middle of the moccasin. Okay? One more time. I'm going to take it and fold it in half, forgetting the little tab at the back. That's just for closing the heel up. Once I've folded that in half, I'm going to take the front half and fold it in half. And that gives me those lines. Now I want to do is transfer those lines onto that bigger piece of paper. So here I use 1 thumb width, and I put a little mark with my marker on that paper. Here I use, and then I use thumb for this side and thumb for the back. 1 thumb at the back, 1 thumb on the outside of the left foot. Then I use 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers, and 3 fingers. And I put a little nick here and here. Now in order to get this nice curve, I can put 2 fingers here, put a nick, 2 fingers here, put a nick, and then just like joining the dots. So I'm going to join those dots, which is going to give me that curve. Okay, so now I've got this drawn out. At the back, I'm going to put a slight curve on this after I've come in that thumb width, a slight curve, and that's going to fold up onto the heel. So I'll just demonstrate on the paper. Once it's done, this is going to come up, this is going to come up, they're going to overlap like so. I'm forming the heel here. This is going to get sewn, and then finally this is going to come up and get sewn across the heel. Once I've got my main pattern done, the last thing I need for a pattern is the actual piece for the vamp. So in order to get that, I am going to take a second piece of paper, lay it underneath. I'm going to mark that all the way around and cut it out. Now the reason I want these lines don't have to go on the hide. They're going to be reference lines for where I start and stop my stitching. And you'll also notice that this isn't asymmetrical. And neither is a foot. So if we think about the human foot, the longest part is the big toe. So there's visualize your big toe there on the left foot. So if it was just asymmetrical, it would sit like this, and it would be tight on your big toe, and this would be askew here. By forming it actually off the template, you get the wider part for the big toe, or longer part I should say, and this square part here is where your foot is going to slide in. And so now it's 90 degrees to your foot, the top of your foot, and not askewed like this on your foot, because that's where we're going to do that overlapping upper part when I get to that point. So once you've done that, if you've got the left side done, if you reverse that, you've got the right. And the same with this model, that would be the left, and that would be size 10 right. And I put these marks here so that I can transfer them to the next piece. So doing the right, so you can see I've got these marks here and here, these marks here and here, and the center part here. I've done the same on the back side of the vamp for the right foot. I don't need back here because that's where I'm going to run out, but this is going to align with this, and that's going to align at this point. So I'm going to get out my needle and thread and show you, and just before I get to the thread, I did find some sinew out here. So there's what artificial sinew looks like. It's basically nylon. And it is pretty tough, but it is very not authentic, especially as I mentioned, as it ages. So I don't use that other than to tie up stuff with. Anyway, so waxed Irish linen. Now we're going to use what's called a Glover needle. I prefer a nest-shaped one. You can use just a straight Glover. They're pretty simple stitches. You can get very involved with your stitching. You could do saddle stitching. I could use my sewing pony that I built and actually do 2 needles where I'm putting a knot in between each lace, but you really don't need it for moccasins. What you do need is to reinforce it at a couple of points that are going to be stressed, where you're pulling it on. So here and here, you're going to want to really stress that. You want to stress it at the toe, or put extra thread so that because they are stress points. Your tools are quite basic. You need a knife. Sometimes if you get into some really tough stitching, a small pair of pliers to pull on the needle is handy. You need a Glover needle. Basically they're 3-sided, and it's going to be pretty hard to see, but you have 3 cutting edges in an awl shape that goes through the material quite well. So you're going to cut an adequate length. For the sides, 1.5 feet is ample. For a knot, I basically put a bite in it, turn it 3 or 4 times, put it back through the bite, pull, and cut off the tail. And I've formed the knot that I need. So the first thing I'm going to do here, again, when you're sewing these, you have to decide whether you want the smooth side out or in. A lot of people like this side. They think it absorbs grease better. I've found that isn't the case. I prefer it this way. So you're always sewing inside to inside, or if you were doing it the other way, it would go like that. So you want it to look like that, so you've got the smooth side out. So the smooth side is always the hair side of the animal, which has a grain to it. The rough side is the carcass side of the hide, which has a membrane, and that's why you have that fuzziness there. So the first thing I'm going to do is find these 2 side hatches, and I'm going to just tie a simple knot here. All I want, again, those are just reference points. And those black marks that I made, they're going to be on the inside of the moccasin, so you're not going to see them. So twice through is ample. Go through the eye. Cut it off. Now I'm going to the other side, and I am going to line up this line with this line, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I've got my knot on both sides. So that area, now I'm going to start with the hatch mark on the bottom of my vamp and the hatch mark on the sole of the thing. I'm going to start there. I'm going to go all the way to in this case, to the left. You can do it the other way if you like, and then all the way here. So all that material that you see, I've got to use all this lower sole material up in that length of vamp on the top, and that's where the puckers are going to come. From there, back to this hatch mark, that's just going to get straight sewn. That's going to be a whip stitch. Okay, so I have tied both sides, as I pointed out. Now I'm going to use that material up. So here, I'm going to start with that center hatch, there and there, but I'm going to hide this knot. I don't need to see that knot, and a knot on the outside of moccasins is always a wear point. So I'm going to go through there. That's going to get hidden. Let me close this guy up. And again, because this is a stress point, I'm going to go through that at least twice. There's once. There's twice. And then when I come through, to kind of lock that, I'm going to get this fairly close. I'm going to go through this once. I'm going to go through this twice. And then I'm going to pull that down. And that's going to lock that up really nice. Now, pucker wise, it's what you find aesthetic. You can go with great big puckers like that. You're going to not have very many. I like to keep them small, so I'll bring this guy over as an example. Fairly small, try to keep them consistent. When you decide on what size you want it to end up kind of aesthetically pleasing, I guess, for lack of a better word. So what I do is I take about 1/8 of an inch on either side, 1/8 here, 1/8 there, which makes about 1/4. And then I make a 1/8 inch stitch. And I come through. Each one of these stitches is going to get two passes. So there's one. There's two. Now those stitches, you're not going to see them. They're going to go in between each one of these puckers when you're done. So for your next pucker, I kind of form it. You have to keep pulling this up because you want to go down like this. I'm going to form that pucker, lean it against this guy. It's a little big. Lean it up against that previous one. And go through again. And a second pass. It's also worth noting, if I was using brain tanned deer hide or brain tan any, the brain tan deer hide here, I can take this stitch and I can literally go right at the edge like that. That will not tear out. If I went that close on commercially tanned hide of any kind, I don't care how thick it is, it's going to be a weak point and it will rip out. The old process, the way the natives did it in days gone by, is by far superior to anything we do commercially today. So I'm just going to carry on here. So another pucker. Trying to keep that consistency, leaning up against that other guy. That lace comes down between those puckers, and I go through twice. Okay, I showed both the finished one and the one I'm working on. In terms of how many puckers you're going to do, it really doesn't matter. Basically, you can see I've run out of surplus material on the sole now, so I've got the same amount of material on the vamp as I do the sole, so I can just start my whip stitch now all the way back. And as you can see, the same thing happened on this moccasin, but it gave me the rounded toe I wanted with the projection for the big toe in it. So, and you can see how this is going to be 90 degrees to the foot when it slides in. So at this point, I am going to do, you can do a number of things here. You can do a simple whip stitch, reinforce it back at this point, because that's a stress point when you're pulling that moccasin on and off, on and off. Every time you use it, that's going to be a stress point. So we're going to reinforce that a bit. So you can do a simple whip stitch. You can do a saddle stitch. Now switch to 2 needles with that lock in between. Or you can do a back, I don't know what you'd call it. I call it a back cross hatch stitch. So I'm going to stitch all the way down a whip stitch. I'm going to come back on the opposite angle, which is going to make little X's all along and sort of reinforces it enough for structural integrity. And here I'm looking at roughly 1/4 of an inch for each whip stitch should be adequate. Keeping, so there you can see I'm going from the first whip stitch back 1/4 of an inch through both pieces of leather. Pull it through, and you can see how they go on an angle. And it'll be clearer when I come back. I want that nice and tight. But as I come back, I'm going to cross each one of them. So I'll go from this hole into this hole, which will make a little X in each one of them, which is quite a strong stitch. Not quite as strong as a saddle stitch, but that's a little overkill on a pair of moccasins. Okay, I've gone from my puckered area of the toe all the way along the side to the very end. I'm going to go through here 3 times. Again, what I'm looking for is a strong reinforcement at a stress area when you're putting it on, so that's twice. And that would be 3 times. And that puts me on the right side to come back to this previous stitch, and as I go through the top part of that, I go through the bottom part of this. And it's easier to see when I've completed a second one. So here we go. So now you'll see this is going to cross over that stitch. It goes through the previous hole there and out through the hole right there. And it makes a very strong back stitched component. And you can see the little X it's going to make right there. And we just do that until we get back to the pucker toe, tie it off. So I've made it all the way back with my little crosshatch stitch, and I'm on my very last one of the first pucker, or last pucker. I'm going to finish that off the same way. I make a loop, go through, come through, go through a second time, and draw that down. Make sure it's nice and tight, and cut off the excess. Pleased with how it turned out. It's pretty much the same appearance aesthetically as the first one. I've put Chris's foot back in this guy. I haven't demonstrated the heel yet. I will when I get at this one this evening, but I thought what I would do now is demonstrate the last step on this moccasin is the upper. So I need the foot in there to determine that. I did this with Kathy's foot. She put it in and stood in it, and then I measured from, because this is the left, I measured from here across to here, all the way around, and back across here a second time. So what you're looking for, I'll pull this out for a minute. When I'm measuring to cut the upper, which is this piece, I want it to be twice the width of the vamp. So there's one, there's two, and then from here, that should go all the way around the moccasin back to this point. So what I'm doing, because this is the left side, I want the flap when it's done to overhang to the left. So you're going to use a cordage or a leather wang to tie off the upper. And you want that not either on the outside of your moccasin or the back, so it doesn't interfere with snowshoeing and such. So this is going to get fixed here. It's going to get sewn all the way around. It's going to come back here, and it's going to get stitched at this point right here. And then this is loose. This crosses over. This is going to keep the snow out, and that's where you're going to tie off your upper moccasin. The other thing you can do, use my leg as a demonstration. So I'm starting just for the left foot. I'm going to start sewing it on this side of the vamp. I'm going to go completely around the moccasin, sew it there again, and then this is going to go across the top. So the other thing you can do, and I've seen it frequently done, is you can put a single button there, a pewter button, you know, something, I don't know if I got one out here or not. You can put a horn, an antler button, a wooden button. So sometimes they'll do that, but I suggest using lacing, which I'll demonstrate when I'm done. Okay, because I want the hair side, right, or the grain side of the hide, the smooth side is out on all portions of the moccasin. I want the same here. I got to sew these back to back so that when it does stand up, you've got the green side or the hair side of the animal on the outside completely. So we start by sewing it here, and we're going to start here. And again, this is a stress point because you're going to pull on this to put the moccasins on, and I really want to reinforce that area. And the same when I come around with the other one, I'll reinforce it there again. So it's going to make a really strong moccasin. So for the upper, I've gone 3 wraps here. So I've hid the knot, 3 wraps around. And I'm actually going closer here, again, because of the stress one's going to put on this. So I'm going about every 1/8 of an inch for a stitch. And we'll do that all the way around till we come back to this point, and then we'll have the upper done. I've got my whip stitch done from the front inside corner of the left foot all the way around to the back. Once I get to this point, you can see that I've got 3 layers of leather to go through. So this is where I've sewn the heel in the moccasin. And so you need an awl to get through that portion until you get back to the single layer, and then you can just use your needle at that point. And that'll be the last stitch I need the awl for. I'm going to go a couple of times through that heel part. Again, you're pulling on the back of that leather often to get it up and over your foot, so it's good to reinforce things at their stress points. And now we're back to, as you can see, a single layer. Well, 2 layers, but much easier to get the Grover needle through. So last stitch, and here I'm really going to reinforce this 3 or 4 times through, locking each one of those hoops. And we'll do one more. That'll be 4 times through that stress point right there, through there. Cut off excess. There we have one completed moccasin. Like I said, there's a couple of options here. You do want it cross-laced. So you're going to put lacing and cross it, and then I tie my knot at the back. But you can put, if you're inclined, you could put some antler buttons over here and maybe here. The one reason that I go with vamp moccasins over center seam, if you snowshoe. If you just snowshoe for an hour or 2, center seam's fine. But if you trek for days or a week and you're on snowshoes constantly all day long, you're going to rue the day you ever wore center seam moccasins. So these are certainly for winter use, although you can make them without the liners, and they make a fine summer moccasin as well. But that's one finished. Off to the next one. So the way I find the heel, where I'm going to sew the heel, is once I've got the pucker done and the sides done. So this is for the right foot. I put the insole back in, stand in it. Again, my foot's too big for it. So I had Kathy stand in it, and then basically I had to put a couple of fingers back. Her foot's a little smaller at the back, and then I find where this comes tight inside that moccasin. So I find that spot. Using the awl, I put a hole through it, single hole through it. Again, what I'm going to do here is hide the knot inside and come over the top. And once I've got that first stitch in, once I've established that first stitch, I can start sewing the whole length of it. And the last step, once I get the heel done here, I'm going to sew up the very bottom of the heel. And I'm going to back stitch this whole thing, so I'm going to stitch it, like just do a whip stitch all the way around it once, and then I'm going to back stitch it, the whole thing, similar to what I did here. So it's a continuous thread. Again, that's a stress point, and that's really rugged when you finish them off like that versus just a single stitch. About 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little less than 1/4 of an inch for each stitch would be adequate.